Beauty. All right. Well, thank you for those of us who are online, and hello to everyone on YouTube who is watching this now. Today we're going to go over the engagement working group. This is the inaugural engagement working group meeting. A lot to cover today, so we're going to zip through as quickly as possible. We're going to give a brief overview on the context of the engagement working group and the story so far. We're going to go through the structure of the thing, the roles, accountabilities, what we think that the engagement working group will do, and as well as the next steps. And then any questions that we might have after that, if we want to hash that out. I'm hoping to not go longer than an hour. We'll see what we get to. So my name's Reese, for those of you that don't know, and I'm hoping to be on the engagement working group. It's the one I'm most excited about. The working groups that we've identified as part of Flux to move the work in Flux forward, to grow Flux as a political party, and to be getting work done, to be getting our message out there, to be growing our membership base, and to be implementing issues-based direct democracy. There's no real reason why a system that is superior can't be implemented at any time. So these are the working groups that we've identified to do all of those things. So last week's meeting was on the awareness working group, getting the message out there. This week is on engagement. It's about how we operate as a party, how we engage our members, and how we engage with it within the party, our culture. Next week, I believe, will be implementation, which is the guts of Flux, all the wonderful things that we want issues-based direct democracy to be doing. So we'll be getting into that because that's quite a complex territory. And then lucky last is finance, which is where we get our money from. So keep this party going. So those are the four ones that we've identified so far. Basically, the engagement working group is to bring energy into Flux, creating and maintaining a joyful and generative culture of contribution. And what that means is we want people to join, and we want people to push issues-based direct democracy and the Flux mission and have fun while doing it. There's three roles that we've identified at this stage, and that this can definitely change, but there seems to be three main branches to the work, which is outreach, onboarding, and enculturation. As you can see, outreach, reaching out to our members, reaching out to the public to increase membership growth, and also reaching out to members to see if they want to get involved with Flux. Identifying what the working groups need at the moment, what if they're stuck on issues, if there's a project that they need doing where they need a skill set that they don't have access to, basically identifying that and finding the person that can solve that problem or has the skill set to move that project forward. So finding that skill set from within the community or from outside our existing community. And then coordinating with the awareness working group to make sure that people who are interested in getting involved know how to get involved, and that's a clear process. Onboarding. Then once people come on with us, basically making sure that they have a good entry into the organization, that they're connected with people who are doing projects that are relevant to their interests, they're connected with their local community, and that we want to have a time of checking up on them in that initial period so that they are feeling welcome and are feeling like they are part of something bigger than themselves when they join Flux. So really making sure that people are linking in and staying linked in when they first come. So really, onboarding, getting members on board and guiding them through the process of becoming active members in the Flux community. And then the fun bit, enculturation. So basically cultivating a strong community culture. This can look like organizing events, maintaining internal communications. I'm very passionate about nonviolent communication, so I'd like to run those trainings for members. But whatever contributes to a strong community culture where we can get work together and also engage in this process of deliberation that we're all passionate about, with a focus on getting work done, of course. Identifying voters that might be receptive to Flux and sorry, ignore that one. It's mainly those next 2 points are wrong, and it's just the first point that should be there. Pardon me. There's a few other messages there too. Anyway, moving right along. So we've actually done a little bit of thinking about what this group is going to look like. So from here, I'm going to pass it over to Joe, who is also interested in being a part of the Flux engagement working group, and has done a bit of thinking about what the next steps might be for anyone interested in getting involved, what the first round of work might look like, and also just how we position ourselves. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Reese. I'll just go back to the previous slide briefly, if that's okay.
Of course.
So really there's 4 different, we're going forward now. We'll go back one more.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So there's really 4 different headings that I just wanted to talk about briefly. The first one is what we already know about the Flux membership and about the volunteers, and maybe a little bit about what we don't know but would like to know. Then I want to talk briefly about 3 sets of theory, which obviously have enormous amounts that you could talk about, but just really quickly. The idea of volunteer management, the idea of best group work practice, so how you actually getting groups to work together, and the ideas of taking in the concept of thinking global, acting locally. Then what I'm going to talk about is the membership and role of local groups in Flux, and the next practical steps that we need to do to engage the working groups. So mapping volunteers, developing roles in the groups, those types of things. I'll cover that in more detail as we go into it. So let's start with what we already know about the existing Flux members. So we've got over 7,000 members at the moment in Flux. Of those, we know that over 1,800 have actually said that they're prepared to volunteer, which is really exciting. However, there's a big drop between those 1,800 and the approximately 400 that we currently have on Slack, which is the main site that we'd be expecting to see some volunteer engagement on. And then again, quite a big drop, so that we're looking at 19 on the working group for awareness, 14 on the working group for engagement, 14 on the working group for implementation, and 12 on the working group for finance. So if you're on finance, you're really popular. No, I'm joking. Just some friendly rivalry. There's around the same number. There's, in the teens for all of the working groups. So we also know there's a whole lot of other Slack groups that have been created. And they include a group for overseas people, a group for New Zealand, and a group for the UK, and a generic international group. There's been groups created for all of the states. So, and then for some reason New South Wales Central West has become a state, but I don't think my knowledge of Australian demographics is actually that bad. So there's been an enormous amount of groups that have been created for specific areas within New South Wales only, and all of these have been created by the one person, and each of them have different numbers of members. And we really don't know enough about if any of those are really humming or not at this point. And there's also one just called remote members, so one of the things that we are going to have to get our heads around is that process as well. So that's sort of what we already know about what's happening in Flux at the moment and its members. What we don't know is why people have joined Flux, why they're offering to volunteer, where those volunteers are located in terms of around Australia by locality, what expertise areas they might particularly have, or working groups they might be interested in, or in fact what they were imagining they were offering when they said that they were going to be a volunteer. Because it could be anything from professional expertise to handing out pamphlets on election day or anything in between. So we don't really know any of that information at the moment, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, would be helpful to know. So I'm going to move away from saying what we do and don't know about our existing membership and go into 3 quick theories that are relevant to engaging memberships. So the first one is about group work. So what we know is that small groups of around 3 to 6 people get things done quite efficiently, but sometimes they don't have very good networks or bigger visions. Groups between 6 and 12 operate quite quickly, and they have fairly good checks and balances for larger vision issues and implications for other areas of the organisation. Groups of 14 over 14 and really quite cumbersome at times. And by the time you're hitting around 20, it actually becomes really difficult to figure out who's responsible to do what bit. And the best idea then is to start talking about dividing into subgroups or project groups. And division can involve a mentoring process. So you could have a group of 20, but it's actually a group of 10 with another 10 people being mentored. But that's a different sort of model. And then eventually you'd be talking about the people who are doing the mentoring disappearing. Obviously, within Flux, we have been sort of embedding the ideas of holacracy. We're back one, sorry, still. And I think we need some specialty knowledge around holacracy and some sort of critical views of how that's operating more efficiently, but we'll get to that later. And then the final theory of group work is that all good community development work starts from the inside and works out. So it works with what we already have, and then it starts expanding out from the strength rather than looking at what we're missing. So the next set of theories I wanted to talk about briefly is about thinking local, acting global. Basically, there's two reasons that Flux needs to start having some local thought processes around its global visions for changes in democracy. And those include the fact that the Australian electoral processes are actually very place-based. So it makes sense to have ourselves also organised at a place-based level, given that we're a political party in Australia. And those place spaces include state, federal and local government areas, and we'll be rolling around different elections in different states and local government areas across the country at different times. So, you know, that local nature will be moving all the time. And the other thing is that place-based organisations allow for things that massively large federal organisations don't allow for, and that includes things like face-to-face contact, being relevant to whatever's going on in that local community, and also a strong sense of like development and sense of community, like we're from the same area and also members of Flux. How exciting. Hopefully. So basically what we're proposing is that all Flux members by definition automatically also become members of three particular groups: their federal electorate group, their state electorate group, and their local government electorate group. They also optionally can become members of their state, like the entire state working group, plus the working groups that have been presented over the last few nights, so engagement, awareness, finance and implementation. And also there are some sub-working groups, for example, coding and education or the SteerCo. So any of those groups they can optionally become members of, but the others they are by definition members of. Their involvement and their level of involvement might, you know, wax and wane. They might be only just a member and not participating, or they might be massively involved, but by definition they're already signed up to those groups. That's the idea. So what would these local groups do then? They would probably have like a local Facebook or Twitter page, and they would organise local get-togethers in ways that are appropriate to that group. So it might be in someone's house or in a pub, or it might be in, you know, a university setting or park, or it's hard to know until you see the group. It might have to be online because it's a very remote and isolated community as well. It might be during local events. So this local group could then start doing local engagement, so talking to existing schools, TAFEs, universities, service groups like Lions, Rotary, Probus, CWA, community groups like Aboriginal community groups, sporting groups. Toastmasters would be a great example because there's a lot of public speaking skill sets that are developed in that, so that the members would be developing public speaking skills and also speaking about Flux at the same time. And, you know, this could go on. This is just a very limited number. And obviously, each local group would decide for themselves how much they wanted to do this. And I have said this activities could include, because they might choose to take on some of these activities and not others. They could also take on local recruitment tasks, such as thinking about friends, co-workers, students or volunteers who might be interested in Flux, and also potentially talking about engaging local people who've been running as independents in state, federal and local government elections because they're not wanting to affiliate with any other party, and getting a sense of whether or not they're running as independents actually would in some ways be able to align with Flux. They could just be at local events and stalls, market stalls or festivals, talking about Flux or handing out information about it. They could talk about finding local election candidates. They could recruit those and even talk about selection processes. They could talk about welcoming in new members to their area. So as soon as a member comes to Flux, immediately they're allocated to the 3 groups that they're in, and then someone from those 3 groups, federal, state or local, whichever one's the most active at the time. And those 3 will overlap quite significantly anyway. So it may be the one person for all 3 that sort of facilitates would be the person that then was allocated to ring them, welcome them, see how they wanted to get involved. And they could also be involved in fundraisers. These are just some ideas. There could be completely other things that local branch groups might also be interested in. And then there might be, depending on the size, some might not be able to do anything more than a get-together. But at least there would be that. So if we go on to the next slide, the types of roles that you'd hope to see in each group, and this is how we link back to the working groups we're talking about now, is obviously a lead link, which is a sort of holacracy term for the person who facilitates people getting together. So we'd be wanting to volunteer in each of those localities eventually to do that, but any volunteers we could find that were keen on that to start with. And then local communications, so they might be doing the Facebook page or the stall or whatever, and they would be liaising with the communications working group. Local engagement, so they would be talking about organising the members get together, the welcome of the new members, those types of activities, and liaising again with our engagement working group. Local finances and legal, so if they're doing fundraising, they might need someone who's involved in that activity, liaising with the fundraising group. If there's local elections, they may be liaising with the state group for that. Or there may be some other group that's formed eventually to give advice on, dealing with the Australian Electoral Commission. And you may also have a local events person. So I've listed them in the order of what I think is probably most likely that they might recruit. So lead link is clearly the most critical. And then the communications and engagement are the next 2 critical. And then depending on what the group decides to do, the next 3 could also be formed. So how do we go from that sort of theoretical idea of what Flux could look like to a practical next step? So as I said, we always start from what we've already got and work out. So the first thing we really need to do is work out the roles for our engagement group and make sure that we actually have people connected to those roles. We've started doing some of that, but if you're interested, there's definitely space for you. We'd really love to have you along. Also, we need to set up regular times for the engagement group to start meeting and sort out exactly some sort of technical issues about the engagement group's access to the database of members. So we know there's 1,800 volunteers, but at the moment we really have no idea who they are or where they're based or what they're interested in. So to start with, we need to figure out access to that database of members, taking into account privacy and things like that, and then start mapping those. We also need to start finding out what other working groups would like in terms of volunteer skills. So let's say the finance working group says we would really like a lawyer or an accountant. Then when we start ringing around volunteers, if we find a lawyer or accountant, we know to head them that way. On the other hand, they might say we want a photographer. I'm not sure why they would, but I know nothing about why that group would want, particularly why it wants, so asking them what they're looking for. Setting up Slack pages for the local groups with some sort of consistent naming system, because there's so many local groups that could potentially be formed. So people can actually go, so for example, Richmond, there's 5 Richmonds across Australia. There's Richmonds in Victoria, there's Richmonds in Tasmania, there's Richmonds in New South Wales. Some of them are state, some of them are local. And so finding a way to name all of the different Richmonds so that we know which Richmond we're talking about. And then once we've got that in place, we can start getting people as we contact them to make sure that they're joining the relevant groups straight away. So then we want to start engaging members of existing place-based groups as well, because as you can see, there's already groups that are operating on Slack, to get a sense of how they're going, what they're doing well, what they're struggling with, what sort of supports they would like. And also engage those who are on Slack who have signed up, the 400 that have signed up that have not yet connected to any groups. So that's, again, working from the inside out. So these guys are obviously the most engaged and working out. Then ideally we'd be able to visually map our membership base and locations to the map layers that you can get that show the electoral boundaries, and potentially map out So you should be able to see a map of Australia with little pins of all the places where people are saying they're prepared to volunteer for Flux, and start saying, oh, well, here's a conglomerate. There's 4 people wanting to volunteer in this electorate area. They probably don't know about each other. How about we give them all a call and see if any of them want to facilitate a meeting? And then how about we start discussing, if we're giving them the contact details of everyone else, how we do that in a way that's fair and ethical. And then probably we would run a project that I'm talking about, calling the Calling Volunteers project, where we would start, once we've mapped out the critical people, start identifying who we want to call first, and then just start calling out from there, working out. So that's the sort of practical next steps. Am I talking too fast? Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to take too much time. So in the engagement group, there'll be a bunch of tasks in order to deliver those steps. We'll need to assign a lead link to our engagement group to get us together. We'll need to assign someone to oversee the database of members and potentially Slack profiles to know what can be kept and what privacy can be released and what can't, and, to make sure that people aren't duplicating documents, those types of things. We'll probably want to assign someone as a local groups facilitator to be able to be a resource to groups as they start to form. We'll probably want to assign someone to existing volunteer support, especially around things like maybe dealing with conflict, as Reese was talking about earlier, so that if they're in trouble, they've got someone that they can contact. We'll probably want to look into developing a members or volunteers newsletter, so we can start sending out a newsletter to all these guys saying, oh, look what this particular group is doing at the moment. Here's some photos of their local festival, or here's a resource they developed in their local school. Here's the people that you can contact. Well done to those guys. Or even to say, this is what one of the other working groups is looking for at the moment, advertise particular volunteer positions, those types of things. We'd probably want to assign a new member and volunteer recruitment specialist, but that role may be able to be filled by the local members, but it's someone that they can go back to as they're talking to new members. And we'll probably want to find somebody who has some sort of expertise around holacracy, so that they're able to communicate that to local groups around the way they work, because people are used to working in a hierarchical structure, and unless they've dealt with concepts like holacracy, we might find ourselves falling into hierarchical structures further down the line. And then obviously, and again, these tasks might be shared, so one person might do multiple tasks. Some liaison with the steerco, some liaison with communication, some liaison with finance, and some liaison with the implementation groups. And probably I should have added there some liaison with the state groups. Sorry, state groups, we love you. We just don't write everything on slides. So the next slide really in all of this is just talking briefly about the project Calling Volunteers, which is really, I guess, the first big push once some practical tasks are done by the engagement group. And we've got some basic questions here which follow along the lines of appreciative inquiry. Reese and I had a lovely conversation about appreciative inquiry today, but basically it's the concept that instead of asking people what they don't like and what they don't like, you make sure that you generate enthusiasm and momentum forward by asking people what it is they do like and would like to see. So we've got questions here, which is really just a draft at this point. We're really interested in comments and feedback, but questions like, why did you join Flux, which hopefully will be useful information. What would you like to get from Flux? What would you like to see Flux particularly do? What have you already engaged in? What's stopping you from engaging further? What are your job, study, skills and hobby areas? What would you like to give or donate to Flux in terms of time, energy and potentially money, but time and energy as well? Provide some information to the people that we call about the local groups that they would be involved in, what's already existed, and potentially, oh, you would be involved in this group, but there's currently no one there. So would you be keen on being a part of that? And also providing, there is a local group, but there's only 2 people and they'd really love to talk to you, whatever it is we need to do. And providing practical assistance to joining Slack. So this is how you sign up to Slack. This is how you join up to your local Facebook group, and also the state and federal Facebook groups, if they're on Facebook. And who else would you like to see recruited to Flux, and do you want to help with that? So they might have particular names that say, oh, those people would be really great as members of Flux, and then we can talk about how they could be contacted and recruited. So that's really the idea behind the project Calling Volunteers. If there are other questions that you're thinking could be asked, obviously we'd really like to hear about it. It's probably a few weeks away before we get to the point where we are doing this calling. And the other idea, I guess, which hasn't been written on a slide is as many people as want to be involved in Calling Volunteers, really, the more we have, the better, because if there are 5 people calling 5 people a week, we get through 25 people a week. If there are 10 people calling 5 people a week, we get through 50. If there are 20 people calling 5 people a week, we get through 100. So, even if you're just thinking calling 5 people a week is what I could do, we would love to have you do that. And we'll make sure we resource you to do it. And I think we're ready for the last slide. Or the last slide. Oh, there you go. Join us and help make it happen. And there you go. We got through this in half an hour. I thought that was not possible, but we did.
I never would have thought it possible. But it could be a good chance just to have a bit of a chat as to where we see, we've talked about next steps, but yeah, for anyone else on the call, if they have any questions or comments about anything we've just raised, I'm really excited about this plan because, it's pretty clear what needs to happen, and it makes very clear for me the kind of resources that Flux is already sitting on. 7,000 members, 1,800 of which said they'd be interested in volunteering, which we haven't really been able to tap into yet because we haven't had the structures in place, and we're so close to getting those structures in place and to be able to start really directing that volunteer energy into the organization. This is I like the taste of this plan a lot.
Alison, what are your thoughts? Because this has all been thrown at you.
I've got no content to add. I think it's a really good presentation. It's going to be fabulous to get it onto our YouTube channel and see what people think. And all I can say is thank you to Reese and Joanne for what you've put together. It's a really good starting point. It's really clear. And I'm really excited about it to see where the engagement goes, because I guess in some ways I know each working group do rely on each other, but getting the engagement is pretty imperative. So thank you for your presentation. It's great.
Thank you. So thinking about it from the perspective of other working groups, what do you think they're likely to think about this sort of plan? Is there anything that they might particularly want to add or subtract or participate in?
It's possible the awareness working group can be recruited for some of the initial call outs until we get enough momentum coming through of people doing those calls. Everyone likes it when people put their other people's hands up for work, don't they? In terms of what the plan looks like, I think this feeds into what the other working groups are doing very well. And it's just a matter of making sure that the leadership is in place. And yes, holacracy is non-hierarchical, or not in the hierarchical in the traditional sense. And it's imperative that there's a lead link in each circle, like someone with whom the buck stops, someone who can keep that circle accountable to itself. So I see the first round of contacts as really getting those lead links in place, and that might be throwing it out to the community in terms of advertising for positions, people who are motivated enough to respond to an email rather than us calling them and seeing if they want to join. But we may have to call people as well to get that level of engagement. But getting the leadership in place so that there is a good core team in the engagement group, and that before each next group gets started, as you mentioned, Joe, there is someone who is happy to take a lead on it, and that they're supported so that they know how to do that.
Yeah. And you know, I mean, if we map out the volunteer base properly, we can literally break it down to, I think there's 400 maximum. I really doubt we'll have 400 local government areas. So let's say we're lucky enough to cover like a third of Australia, or, you know, a quarter, let's say, because it's easier to do a quarter of 400 in my head. So, you know, let's say we've got a quarter of Australia's local government areas, for example, then we have only really 100 people to contact, you know, assuming that we get a lead person at each time we contact the first volunteer out of that. But we'll be going from those most engaged to start with anyway. So hopefully we'll be able to do that fairly quickly. And then of that 100, we can give them a list of 30 each or whatever it is in their area to start engaging, to pull that together. You know, we already have 14 people who've expressed an interest in Slack on being in the engagement group. So I think we need to talk to each of them first.
Yeah, and we'll be doing that shortly. Yeah, you saw I put that chat out on the Slack, and we've gotten a few people put their hands up already.
Yeah, cool. I mean, we probably don't need more than 6 to get started.
Great.
And I think we've probably got 3 at least.
Yeah.
Maybe 5. I mean, we're ready to start, I think. And we'll get more people as we go. And I think what we'll find is that once we have local groups running, that as they get frustrated or enthusiastic about things that are affecting their local group that are happening at a working group level, so whether it be a project that they'd like to see rolled out across more regions, or whether it be a particular resource that they need, that they will come in and out of the working groups in order to work on those particular things. And that's the time rely on them as resources. And eventually, if you get some that are enthusiastic enough, you mentor them up and put them in, and move the previous people out into other working groups that need more resources, that are enthusiastic about everything.
Yeah. Well, let's do it then.
Yeah. Nothing more to add.
It's pretty straight up, hey? Well, thanks for joining us. Yeah, thanks for joining the call. It's great to have you both, and anyone on YouTube. Thank you for attending. We hope to see you as part of the engagement working group soon. It's the best one. That's not fair. The other ones aren't up and running yet, but I'm quietly confident. And yeah,
nothing like a healthy competition.
Totally. Great.
Okay.
Well, till next time.
Okay.